Separation anxiety is actually something that a veterinarian would need to diagnose. So true separation anxiety is diagnosed by a veterinarian. So if you're worried that your dog is suffering from separation anxiety, possibly, the first thing that you want to do is make an appointment with your veterinarian. You should do a vet check to rule out any possible medical reason for the behaviors. When you go to the vet, you'll want to let your vet know how long the behavior has been going on, when it happens, and you might even want to chat with your vet about the possibility of medication. Sometimes people are really worried about medication, looking to try everything else prior. However, there are some instances where medication is appropriate in combination with behavior modification. And with meds, we're never looking to change the dog's personality or to completely sedate them, but to allow them to relax enough so that potentially they could work on some behavior modification. So again, having that conversation with your vet is an important piece of the puzzle. So if you're worried about your dog having separation anxiety, after you've done a vet check to rule out that possibly the behavior could be the result of some medical reason, then we want to parse out whether or not we're truly talking about separation anxiety or if we're referring to the more common version, which is isolation distress. So separation anxiety is a big umbrella term, and in general, we'll refer to it as separation anxiety, but true separation anxiety is fortunately more rare. True separation anxiety is when a dog is only comfortable with one specific person. So from a management perspective, that is a really difficult situation. With isolation distress, we're talking about a dog who's able to relax as long as there is any human present, which again, from the management side of things, makes it a little bit easier to work on suspending absences whilst addressing the problem, the underlying issue of the anxiety. A lot of times I'll see in Facebook posts or online questions, queries about a dog who's eliminating inside, thinking the folks thinking that it's a house training issue, or people talking about their dog barking on and on for a long period of time when they're home alone, or their dog who's very destructive. And people sometimes aren't putting together the pieces that all of these puzzle pieces may amount to a dog actually suffering from separation anxiety. So if a dog is eliminating or vocalizing or being destructive or even pacing and panting, we want to first address the underlying cause or the reason for the behaviors before we try to stop or reduce those behaviors. Again, more importantly, would be to figure out why the behavior is occurring in the first place. And if it is as a result of separation anxiety, then we would want to go ahead and address the anxiety, try to help the dog to feel more relaxed and calm. One way to take a good look at what's going on is to watch what's going on remotely. You could, if you don't have camera, which a lot of times people don't have a camera right at the beginning, you could do a FaceTime to FaceTime with your smartphone and another device like a laptop or an iPad. You could do that same setup with a Zoom meeting between your smartphone and another device, or Skype. And what you would want to do is set up your device in the house in a place where it's safe from your dog, so perhaps on a counter, but where you can see what's going on. If you anticipate that your dog is going to come right to the door, you would want to set it up so that you have a view of the doorway. Ideally, you'd have a view of the dog coming to the door. And then you would want to set it up at a time when you can come back. So if you're leaving to go to work all day, that would not necessarily be the optimal time to look in on your dog to do this potential observation, because if the dog is suffering and is vocalizing or being destructive, etc., for a long period of time, you'd want to be able to come back to relieve that anxiety. So sometimes people will say, well, my dog is only barking, or only pacing and doing a lot of panting, or I come home and his muzzle's wet, like he's been drooling all day, but he's not destructive. any types of behaviors that are displayed as a result of a dog having anxiety are still things that we would want to address. Even if the dog hasn't reached the point where they're eating the door frame and thus escaping from the home, that doesn't necessarily mean that the anxiety is any less of a problem for that dog. And just like with people, long-term chronic stress can produce both physical as well as psychological issues. So addressing the underlying reason for the behavior, in this case, if we're talking about anxiety, is equally important, whether or not the anxiety is demonstrated with behaviors that are hugely problematic or seemingly more benign. Again, I say seemingly because stress is stress, and we would still want to address the reason for it and try to help get the dog some help. So as I've mentioned a couple of times, what we really want to do is address the underlying cause, the anxiety. So the behaviors oftentimes are like a symptom of the underlying stress. So if your dog is fearful, anxious, or stressed because they're being left alone as a result of suffering from separation anxiety or isolation distress, then we would want to address that anxiety. We would want to help them to feel more relaxed and comfortable when they don't have access to a person, instead of trying to stop or decrease the behavior, because that just sort of puts a Band-Aid on the situation. And again, it doesn't get at the underlying problem. So let's say a dog is being destructive and someone decides to put the dog in a crate. Well, it's obviously they're not able to chew up the couch. The dog may then decide to try to break out of the crate, might turn to self-injurious behaviors or other types of problems. Maybe they'll eliminate, maybe they could, again, hurt themselves trying to break out of the crate, because just as we've avoided them being able to be destructive in that environment, we haven't figured out the reason for the destruction. And with the case of potential separation anxiety, if it's as a result of an underlying issue that is anxiety, then we would want to address the anxiety, and then the subsequent problem behaviors or behaviors that are problems as a result of the anxiety would go away.